Sandra Bullock walked into the sleek modern real estate office with a sense of calm and purpose. She wasn't there to make headlines or draw attention. She simply wanted to find a peaceful retreat, a place where she could unwind after months of filming, interviews, and red carpets. Dressed in faded blue jeans, a soft gray sweater, and a pair of comfortable sneakers, Sandra looked like any other person searching for their dream home. Her sunglasses rested on top of her head, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. There was no entourage, no manager, no assistant, just Sandra, ready to take care of this errand herself. The moment she stepped inside, the hum of keyboards clicking and phones ringing filled the air. The office had that polished, almost intimidating vibe with its glass walls, marble floors, and rows of desks occupied by sharply dressed agents. A large screen at the front displayed images of sprawling mansions, luxury penthouses, and oceanfront properties. Sandra paused for a moment, taking it all in before approaching the receptionist's desk. "Hi," Sandra said warmly, offering a friendly smile. "I'm looking for a house, something cozy but private, maybe with some land. Could someone help me?" The receptionist glanced up briefly, sizing Sandra up in a way that made her feel slightly uncomfortable. Without missing a beat, the woman replied, "Let me get Victoria for you." She pressed a button on her phone and murmured something into the receiver. Within moments, a tall, impeccably dressed woman appeared from one of the offices. Her heels clicked loudly against the floor as she approached, her posture stiff and her expression unreadable. "I'm Victoria Langley," the woman announced, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "How can I assist you today?" Sandra shook her hand firmly, introducing herself. "Nice to meet you, Victoria. I'm Sandra. I'm hoping to find a quiet place to settle down, somewhere away from the city noise." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying Sandra's casual attire. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, and though her lips curved into a practiced smile, there was something dismissive about it. "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "Let's start by discussing your budget. That will help us narrow down the options." Sandra hesitated for only a second. She didn't come here to flaunt her success or prove anything to anyone. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's tone carried an unspoken assumption that someone who dressed so simply must not have much to spend. "Well," Sandra began, choosing her words carefully, "I'd prefer not to set a strict limit right now. I'm more interested in finding the right property first." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Ah, I see," she said, her voice laced with thinly veiled condescension. "We do have some lovely starter homes available. They're modest but charming. Let's take a look, shall we?" Without waiting for Sandra's response, Victoria turned on her heel and led her to a computer monitor displaying several listings. Each property was small, outdated, and far from what Sandra had envisioned. One house had peeling paint and a sagging roof, while another sat on a tiny lot surrounded by industrial buildings. Sandra tried to mask her disappointment, reminding herself that patience was key. But Victoria's attitude only grew worse as they continued. "Oh, here's one," Victoria exclaimed, pointing to a cramped bungalow with cracked windows. "It's perfect for someone who likes simplicity." She chuckled lightly, as if amused by her own cleverness. Sandra forced a polite smile, though her patience was beginning to wear thin. "It's certainly unique," she said diplomatically, "but I think I'd prefer something a bit more spacious." Victoria sighed dramatically, tapping her pen against the desk. "Spacious tends to come with a hefty price tag," she remarked, her tone implying that Sandra wouldn't be able to afford such luxuries. "Perhaps we should focus on more realistic options." "Realistic?" Sandra thought, raising an eyebrow. Was this woman really suggesting that her dreams were unrealistic? Sandra had spent years building her career, working tirelessly to achieve success both professionally and personally. Yet here she was, being treated like someone who didn't belong in this world of high-end real estate. It was infuriating, but also oddly amusing. Deciding to play along, Sandra leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the counter. "You know," she said casually, "I've always admired those big estates with sweeping views and plenty of privacy. Do you happen to have anything like that?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard by Sandra's boldness. For a brief moment she seemed unsure how to respond. Then, regaining her composure, she laughed nervously. "Oh well, those kinds of properties are quite exclusive," she explained, her voice dripping with insincerity. "But if you're serious, I suppose we could show you a few photos. Just don't get your hopes up." As Victoria scrolled through images of multi-million-dollar homes, Sandra couldn't help but notice the change in her demeanor. The dismissive glances and snide remarks were replaced by forced enthusiasm and exaggerated praise. It was clear that Victoria still doubted Sandra's ability to purchase such properties, but she was willing to humor her, at least for now. Despite the growing tension, Sandra remained composed. She knew that people often underestimated her because of her humble nature and unassuming appearance. And while it could be frustrating, it also gave her a certain satisfaction when they realized their mistake. Little did Victoria know Sandra was about to receive some unexpected backup, and things were about to get very interesting. For now, Sandra decided to bide her time, nodding politely as Victoria rattled off details about each listing. But deep down, she couldn't wait to see the look on Victoria's face when the truth finally came out. Sandra followed Victoria out of the office and into her shiny black SUV, which was parked right outside. The car smelled faintly of leather and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to Sandra's laid-back demeanor. As they drove toward the first property, Victoria continued to talk non-stop, barely pausing for breath. She rattled off facts about each house they were visiting, but her tone remained patronizing, as if she were explaining things to a child rather than a grown woman. The first stop was a small, rundown cottage tucked away on the edge of town. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the paint on the exterior was chipping badly. Sandra stepped out of the car, taking in the sight with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "This is quaint," she said diplomatically, trying not to laugh at how mismatched this place was with what she'd asked for. Victoria nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased with herself. "Isn't it adorable?" she gushed. "It has so much potential. With a little TLC, it could be absolutely charming." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "TLC?" she repeated, glancing at the cracked driveway and the sagging front porch. "I think it might need more than just a coat of paint." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, these old houses always look worse than they are. Trust me, once you start fixing it up, you'll fall in love." She gave Sandra a tight smile as if daring her to argue. Inside, the situation only got worse. The walls were yellowed with age, the carpet smelled musty, and the kitchen appliances looked like they belonged in a museum. Sandra wandered through the rooms, pretending to consider the space, while silently marveling at how far off the mark Victoria was. At one point she turned to ask about the plumbing system, but Victoria cut her off before she could finish her sentence. "It's functional," Victoria declared brightly, even though neither of them had actually tested any of the fixtures. "And honestly, who needs fancy plumbing when you've got character like this?" Sandra bit back a laugh. Character? This house didn't have character. It had problems. Still, she decided to play along, nodding thoughtfully as Victoria prattled on about how cozy the bedrooms were and how charming the creaky floorboards sounded. By the time they left, Sandra felt like she'd been transported back in time, to an era when people actually lived without modern conveniences. Their second stop wasn't much better. It was a slightly larger home, but it sat uncomfortably close to a busy highway. The constant roar of passing cars made it impossible to imagine finding peace and quiet here. When Sandra mentioned the noise, Victoria shrugged it off. "You get used to it," she said breezily. "Besides, traffic means convenience. You're never far from anything." Sandra blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Convenience? Sure, if your idea of convenience involved being woken up at dawn by honking horns and diesel engines. She walked around the backyard, which consisted of a patch of dead grass surrounded by chain-link fencing. A rusty swing set stood in the corner, swaying slightly in the breeze. Sandra glanced at Victoria, who was busy snapping photos with her phone, presumably to add to her portfolio of success stories. "This isn't quite what I had in mind," Sandra said gently, choosing her words carefully. I'm really looking for something more secluded. Maybe with some trees or open space? Victoria pursed her lips, clearly annoyed that Sandra wasn't jumping at the chance to buy either of these properties. Seclusion comes at a premium, she reminded her, as if Sandra needed to be told again. But don't worry, we'll find something within your range. Within my range? Sandra thought, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. If only Victoria knew just how flexible her range truly was. Instead of correcting her, Sandra simply nodded and climbed back into the SUV. They drove in silence for a few minutes before arriving at their third and final destination, a cramped condo in a cookie-cutter development. The building looked identical to its neighbors, with beige siding and matching garage doors. Inside, the layout was efficient but soulless, with no personality whatsoever. As Sandra wandered through the empty rooms, she noticed Victoria checking her watch repeatedly. It was obvious that the agent was growing impatient, and perhaps even a little frustrated. "What do you think?" Victoria asked finally, her voice tinged with desperation. "It's practical, affordable, and move-in ready." Sandra turned to face her, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's fine," she admitted, "but it's not what I'm looking for. I appreciate your effort, Victoria, but none of these places feel right." Victoria sighed heavily, rolling her eyes just enough for Sandra to catch it. "Well, maybe you should reconsider your expectations," she suggested, her tone sharp. "Not everyone can afford luxury, you know." Sandra froze, staring at her, for a moment. The comment stung, not because it was true, but because it was so unnecessary. She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped herself. There was no point in arguing. Victoria had already made up her mind about who Sandra was and what she could afford. Instead, Sandra forced a polite smile and headed back toward the car. Just as they were pulling out of the parking lot, Sandra spotted someone familiar walking toward the real estate office. Her heart skipped a beat when she realized it was Keanu Reeves, her longtime friend and occasional co-star. He looked relaxed in a pair of dark jeans and a leather jacket, his hands stuffed into his pockets as he strolled casually down the sidewalk. Sandra tapped on the window to get his attention, and when he looked up, his face broke into a wide grin. "Keanu," she called out, rolling down the window. "What are you doing here?" Keanu laughed, leaning down to peer into the car. "Hey, Sandy, just checking out some investment opportunities. What about you?" Before Sandra could answer, Victoria interrupted, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "Oh, Mr. Reeves, what a pleasure to meet you. Are you also interested in buying property today?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, glancing between Sandra and Victoria. "Actually, I'm just browsing," he said smoothly. "But it looks like Sandra's been hard at work. How's the search going?" Sandra smirked, enjoying the sudden shift in dynamics. "Oh, it's been enlightening," she replied, shooting Victoria a pointed look. "Victoria's been showing me some very unique options." Victoria flushed red, clearly flustered by Keanu's presence. She stumbled over her words, trying to explain herself. "Yes, well, we've been exploring various possibilities based on, budgetary considerations." Keanu frowned slightly, sensing the tension in the air. "Budgetary considerations?" he echoed, turning to Sandra. "Is everything okay?" Sandra chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Everything's fine," she assured him. "Let's just say Victoria and I have different ideas about what constitutes charm." Keanu grinned, catching on immediately. "Ah, I see. Well, maybe I can help weigh in on the next round of tours," he offered, his tone teasing. "Two opinions are better than one, right?" Victoria practically melted at the suggestion, nodding eagerly. "Of course, we'd be delighted to have your input, Mr. Reeves." Sandra exchanged a knowing glance with Keanu, both of them suppressing laughter. Little did Victoria know her day was about to take a dramatic turn, and not in her favor. With Keanu now officially part of the property hunt, Victoria wasted no time trying to turn the situation to her advantage. Her demeanor shifted instantly, from dismissive and condescending to overly eager and almost fawning. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside her, transforming her from someone who barely acknowledged Sandra's presence into a woman determined to impress two Hollywood stars. The irony wasn't lost on Sandra, who found herself biting back a grin every time Victoria stumbled over her words or exaggerated her enthusiasm. "Let's start fresh," Victoria declared, clapping her hands together with forced cheerfulness. "Clearly I underestimated what you're looking for earlier. Let me show you something truly special this time." She reached for her tablet, scrolling rapidly through listings that she'd previously dismissed as out of reach for Sandra. Now, however, they were suddenly front and center, accompanied by glowing descriptions meant to dazzle. Keanu leaned casually against the hood of the SUV, his arms crossed as he watched Victoria work. He wore an amused expression, clearly enjoying the spectacle unfolding before him. "So, what are we talking about here?" he asked, his tone light but curious. "Something with a view? A pool? Maybe even a guest house?" Victoria nodded vigorously, pointing to an image of a sprawling estate perched on a hilltop. "This is one of our most exclusive properties," she gushed, her voice rising an octave higher than usual. "It has panoramic views of the valley, a state-of-the-art kitchen, and... Oh, wait until you see the infinity pool." Sandra raised an eyebrow, glancing at Keanu. "An infinity pool, huh? That does sound nice," she said dryly, unable to resist, teasing Victoria just a little more. "But I thought those kinds of features were unrealistic for someone like me." Victoria froze mid-sentence, her cheeks flushing pink. She stammered for a moment, clearly caught off guard by Sandra's pointed remark. "Well, I mean, it's all relative, isn't it?" she managed to say, her polished facade cracking slightly. "Everyone deserves to dream big, right?" Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Absolutely," he agreed, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Dreams are free, after all. Unless you're paying for them, I guess." The comment hung in the air, making Victoria squirm uncomfortably. She quickly moved on to another listing, desperate to change the subject. "Here's another option," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A waterfront mansion with private beach access. Perfect for entertaining, or just relaxing in style." Sandra tilted her head, pretending to consider the property. Private beach access sounds tempting," she mused aloud. "Although I don't know how much entertaining I'll be doing these days. My social calendar's pretty full already." Keanu laughed, nudging her playfully. "Speak for yourself, Sandy. If I had a place like that, I'd throw parties every weekend." Victoria seized the opportunity, jumping in with renewed energy. "Exactly!" she exclaimed, her confidence returning bit by bit. "Imagine hosting events there, charity galas, movie screenings, maybe even a film festival. The possibilities are endless." Sandra exchanged a look with Keanu, both of them silently marveling at how far Victoria had swung the pendulum. Just moments ago, she'd been steering them toward fixer-uppers and starter homes. Now she was pitching multi-million-dollar estates as if Sandra were royalty. The contrast was laughable and utterly satisfying. As they continued browsing through the listings, Keanu began asking thoughtful questions, further flustering Victoria. "What's the square footage?" he asked, tilting his head as he studied the screen. "And what about the land? Is it fully fenced? Privacy's important, especially for someone like Sandra." Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Yes, of course," she replied hastily, flipping through notes on her tablet. "The property is gated and the lot size is approximately 5 acres. Plenty of space for, well, whatever you need." "Whatever I need," Sandra echoed, smirking. "That's reassuring." Keanu grinned, clearly enjoying himself. "And the price?" he pressed, his tone casual but deliberate. "Just so we're clear on what we're working with." Victoria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing numbers after implying earlier that Sandra couldn't afford anything beyond a modest home. "It's competitive," she said vaguely, avoiding eye contact. "But given the location and amenities, it's a steal." A steal, Sandra repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's not exactly how you described it earlier, Victoria. In fact, I seem to remember you saying something about staying within budget. Victoria's face turned beet red, and she stammered, struggling to recover. I may have misspoken earlier, she admitted reluctantly. Sometimes clients surprise us with their vision, and clearly yours is ambitious. Keanu let out a low whistle, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Ambitious, huh? Sounds like someone's aiming high. Good for you, Sandy. Sandra smiled sweetly, leaning back against the car. Thanks, Keanu. I do like to aim high. Keeps life interesting, doesn't it? Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. She glanced between Sandra and Keanu, her mind racing as she tried to salvage the situation. Finally, she straightened up, plastering on a nervous smile. Why don't we visit one of these properties in person? She suggested, her voice trembling, slightly. Seeing it firsthand might help clarify things. Sandra pretended to think about it, tapping her chin dramatically. You know, that's not a bad idea, she said slowly. But only if you promise to stop treating me like I can't afford a decent roof over my head. Victoria winced visibly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Of course, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. My apologies if I gave that impression earlier. I assure you it won't happen again. Keanu patted Sandra on the shoulder, his grin widening. See? Problem solved. Now let's go check out that mansion. I've always wanted to see what infinity pools look like up close. As they climbed back into the SUV, Sandra couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Watching Victoria scramble to backtrack on her earlier assumptions was oddly cathartic. And having Keanu there to witness it made it all the more enjoyable. For once, she didn't mind being underestimated. It gave her the perfect opportunity to prove people wrong in the most satisfying way possible. The drive to the waterfront mansion was quiet, save for Victoria's occasional attempts to fill the silence with awkward small talk. Sandra tuned her out, focusing instead on the scenery outside the window. She could tell that Keanu was doing the same, occasionally glancing at her with a knowing smirk. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew that Victoria's lesson in humility was far from over. When they arrived at the property, Sandra stepped out of the car and took a deep breath, savoring the salty ocean breeze. The mansion was stunning, with sleek modern architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the water. As Victoria led them inside, babbling nervously about the home's features, Sandra felt a twinge of pity for the agent. It must have been exhausting, trying to keep up appearances while knowing full well that she'd misjudged her client so badly. Still, Sandra reminded herself, kindness didn't mean letting others walk all over you. If Victoria had treated her with respect from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Sometimes people needed a wake-up call, and today Victoria was getting hers loud and clear. The waterfront mansion was everything Victoria had promised and more. Its grandeur was undeniable, with polished marble floors, an open-concept living space that seemed to stretch endlessly, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the sparkling ocean like a postcard. The infinity pool blended seamlessly into the horizon, creating the illusion of water spilling directly into the sea. It was breathtaking, luxurious, and undeniably exclusive. Yet despite its beauty, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that this entire tour had become less about finding her dream home and more about watching Victoria squirm. As they walked through the sprawling property, Victoria led the way with forced enthusiasm, pointing out every feature as if she were hosting a live television special. Notice the imported Italian tile in the kitchen, she gushed, gesturing toward the gleaming countertops. And these chandeliers? Custom made by a designer in Paris? Keanu raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Paris, huh? Must have cost a pretty penny. Victoria nodded eagerly, missing or ignoring the sarcasm in his tone. Oh, absolutely. But quality comes at a price, doesn't it? Sandra bit back a smile, glancing at Keanu. I suppose so, she said lightly, though I'm sure some people would argue that charm doesn't always require a hefty price tag. Victoria froze mid-sentence, her face flushing red once again. She knew exactly what Sandra was implying. Her earlier comments about starter homes and staying within budget still hung heavily in the air. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure how to respond without digging herself deeper into the hole she'd created. Trying to recover, Victoria quickly changed the subject. "Let's head upstairs," she suggested, her voice trembling slightly. "The master suite is truly something special." The group ascended the sweeping staircase, which curved elegantly toward the second floor. The master bedroom was indeed impressive, with a private balcony overlooking the ocean and a bathroom that rivaled a five-star spa. A freestanding tub sat beneath a skylight, surrounded by candles and lush greenery. Sandra wandered around the room, taking it all in while Keanu leaned casually against the doorframe, observing the chaos unfold. "You know," Keanu said thoughtfully, breaking the tense silence, "this place is nice. Really nice. But it almost feels too perfect, doesn't it? Like no one actually lives here." Sandra laughed softly, nodding in agreement. "Exactly. Where's the personality? The warmth? This house screams photo shoot, not home." Victoria blinked, clearly thrown off balance. "Well, that's the beauty of it," she replied hastily. "You can make it your own. Add personal touches, decorate however you like. Or maybe find a place that already has character," Sandra interjected smoothly. "Something that feels lived in, not staged." Victoria opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, realizing she was walking on thin ice. Instead, she plastered on another nervous smile and moved on to the next room. By now, her usual confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a mix of desperation and embarrassment. Every step felt like tiptoeing through a minefield, waiting for the next comment that would expose her earlier mistakes. By the time they reached the backyard, Victoria was visibly sweating under the pressure. She gestured toward the sprawling lawn, which sloped gently down to the private beach. "And here we have the outdoor entertaining area," she announced, her voice cracking slightly. "Perfect for hosting guests, or simply enjoying the sunset." Keanu tilted his head, studying the space. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "But I don't think Sandy's much of a hostess, are you?" Sandra chuckled, shaking her head. "Not really. I prefer quiet evenings with a good book or maybe just sitting outside listening to the waves." Victoria nodded vigorously, latching on to the idea. Yes, of course, this would be ideal for relaxation. Peaceful, serene." Her voice trailed off as she realized she was rambling. Keanu stepped closer to Sandra, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. "You'd think she'd treat everyone like royalty, wouldn't you?" he whispered, his lips curving into a mischievous grin. Sandra stifled a laugh, leaning closer to whisper back, "Maybe she will from now on." Their playful banter didn't go unnoticed by Victoria, who stood nearby, clutching her clipboard, like a lifeline. She glanced between them, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. Clearly, she had underestimated both Sandra and Keanu, and now she was paying the price for it. After a few more minutes of awkward commentary from Victoria, Sandra decided it was time to wrap things up. She turned to the agent, her expression calm but firm. "Thank you for showing us this property, Victoria. It's lovely, and I appreciate the effort you've put into today's tours." Victoria perked up slightly, sensing an opportunity to redeem herself. "Of course, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Would you like to see any other options?" Sandra shook her head, her smile unwavering. "No, I think we're done for today. To be honest, I don't feel like this is the right fit for me, and after everything we've seen, I'm starting to wonder if working with you is the best choice either." Victoria's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Wait, what do you mean?" she stammered, panic creeping into her voice. Sandra took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I came here looking for someone who could listen to my needs and respect my vision, not judge me based on appearances. Unfortunately, that's not what I've experienced today." Victoria's face fell, her bravado crumbling completely. I'm so sorry," she stuttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to offend you." Please give me another chance. Keanu stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Sandra's shoulder. It's okay, Sandy, he said gently. People make mistakes. Maybe she's learned something from all this. Sandra nodded, though her gaze remained steady. I hope so, she replied, because treating others with kindness and respect shouldn't depend on who they are, or what you assume they can afford. With that, Sandra turned and began walking back toward the car, leaving Victoria standing speechless on the lawn. Keanu lingered for a moment, giving the agent a sympathetic look. Good luck, Victoria, he said softly before following Sandra. As they drove away, Sandra let out a long breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. That felt satisfying, she admitted, glancing at Keanu with a grin. He laughed, shaking his head. You handled that perfectly. She definitely won't forget this day anytime soon. Sandra smiled, leaning back in her seat. You know, I didn't come here looking for drama, but sometimes life gives you little moments like this to remind you of your worth. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. And sometimes, those moments teach other people a lesson they desperately need to learn. They shared a knowing look, both silently agreeing that justice had been served. For Sandra, the experience wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for herself and reminding others to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of assumptions or first impressions. As the SUV disappeared down the winding coastal road, Victoria was left behind, humbled and reflective, vowing to approach her work and her clients with a newfound sense of humility. Back at the real estate office, Victoria sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly at her computer screen. The hum of activity around her, phones ringing, colleagues chatting, printers whirring, felt distant and muffled, as though she were underwater. Her mind replayed the events of the day like a broken record. Sandra's quiet confidence, Keanu's subtle jabs, and the crushing realization that she'd completely misjudged one of the most famous actresses in Hollywood. Every moment burned, fresh in her memory, each interaction serving as a reminder of her own arrogance. Her assistant, a young woman named Claire, approached cautiously, sensing that something was off. Hey, Victoria, she said softly, holding out a folder. I just finished updating those listings you asked for. Victoria barely acknowledged her, waving a hand dismissively without looking up. Put them on my desk, she muttered, her voice hollow. Claire hesitated for a second, exchanging a worried glance with another agent nearby before retreating quietly. The whispers had already started. Word spread quickly through the office about what had happened earlier, how Victoria had treated Sandra Bullock like an ordinary client, only to be blindsided when Keanu Reeves walked in and turned the tables. Some agents snickered behind closed doors while others shook their heads in disbelief. A few even pulled up photos of Sandra online, marveling at how unassuming she'd looked in jeans and sneakers. No one dared mention it directly to Victoria, but the tension in the room was palpable. Meanwhile, Sandra and Keanu decided to grab lunch at a cozy cafe not far from the waterfront mansion. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with soft jazz playing in the background and sunlight streaming through large windows. They settled into a corner booth, ordering sandwiches and iced teas as they debriefed about the day's events. I have to admit, Sandra said between bites, that felt good. Not because I wanted to embarrass her, but because it reminded me why humility matters. People shouldn't judge others based on how they look or assume things about them. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, swirling his straw in his glass. Exactly, and honestly, it's kind of sad that she needed a wake-up call like this, but hey, maybe it'll stick. Maybe she'll think twice next time before treating someone like they're invisible. Sandra leaned back in her seat, resting her chin on her hand. You know, I've been in situations like this before. People see fame and success, and they either fawn all over you or underestimate you entirely. It's exhausting. Sometimes, I wish I could walk into a room and just be normal. Keanu chuckled, raising his glass in a mock toast. To being normal, he said with a grin. Though let's face it, Sandy, you'll never pull that off. You're too extraordinary. For normal, she laughed, rolling her eyes playfully. Thanks, Keanu, always the charmer. They spent the rest of their meal reminiscing about old times, shared experiences on movie sets, late-night conversations during filming, and inside jokes that only they understood. For Sandra, it was exactly what she needed after the stress of the morning. By the time they left the cafe, she felt lighter, more grounded, and ready to move forward. Back at the office, Victoria finally snapped out of her daze. She glanced at the clock, realizing hours had passed since Sandra and Keanu had walked out. The weight of what she'd done and how poorly she'd handled herself settled heavily on her shoulders. She thought about the way Sandra had remained, calm and composed throughout the ordeal, never once losing her temper or stooping to pettiness. Even Keanu had been gracious, offering subtle reminders about respect without rubbing salt in the wound. Victoria sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. She knew she couldn't undo the damage she'd caused, but she could at least try to make amends. Picking up her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Sandra's publicist, a connection she'd overlooked earlier, too focused on appearances to consider reaching out professionally. Taking a deep breath, Victoria dialed the number. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered. "Hello? Hi, this is Victoria Langley," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm calling regarding Sandra Bullock. She paused, gathering her courage. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier today. I realize I didn't treat her with the respect she deserves, and I'd like the opportunity to make things right, if she's willing." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Finally, the publicist replied, "Thank you for reaching out, Victoria. I'll pass along your message, but ultimately it's up to Sandra whether she wants to reconnect." Victoria nodded, even though the publicist couldn't see her. "Of course, thank you." Hanging up, she exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Whether Sandra chose to forgive her or not, Victoria knew she couldn't keep operating the way she had been. Treating clients differently based on their appearance or perceived wealth wasn't just unethical, it was unsustainable. If she wanted to succeed in this industry, she needed to change her approach. Later that evening, Victoria attended a team meeting at the office. Her boss, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Carter, addressed the group with her usual efficiency. "All right, everyone," Evelyn began, scanning the room. "Let's go over the week's performance metrics. Who's closing deals? Who's struggling?" When it came time for Victoria to report, she cleared her throat nervously. "I may have mishandled a situation today," she admitted, her cheeks flushing red. "A potential client came in, and I underestimated them. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. They'd already moved on." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Do tell." Victoria hesitated, then recounted the story, leaving out names but emphasizing the lesson she'd learned. "It taught me that assumptions can ruin relationships," she concluded. "From now on, I plan to treat every client with the same level of professionalism and kindness, regardless of how they present themselves." The room fell silent for a moment before Evelyn nodded approvingly. "Good," she said firmly. "That's the attitude we need around here. Learn from this, Victoria. Humility goes a long way in this business." As the meeting wrapped up, Victoria returned to her desk, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to her entire team, sharing her reflections and encouraging them to prioritize empathy in their work. Though she knew rebuilding her reputation would take time, she was determined to turn this setback into an opportunity for growth. That night, as Sandra scrolled through her phone, she noticed a notification from her publicist. Opening the message, she read Victoria's apology and smiled faintly. While she didn't feel the need to respond immediately, she appreciated the gesture. Perhaps, she thought, there was hope for Victoria after all. Turning off her phone, Sandra climbed into bed, reflecting on the day's events. She had set boundaries, stood up for herself, and, in her own way, taught someone an important lesson. More importantly, she had stayed true to who she was, humble, kind, and unbothered by the opinions of others. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that sometimes life delivers the best lessons in the most unexpected ways. The next morning, Sandra woke up feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the day. The sun streamed through her bedroom window, casting golden light across the room. She stretched lazily, replaying the events of the previous day in her mind. While it had been an unusual experience, she couldn't deny that it left her with a sense of clarity. Life often handed people opportunities to grow, whether they were on the giving or receiving end of a lesson, and Sandra knew that yesterday's encounter was no exception. After enjoying a leisurely breakfast, Sandra decided to take a walk along the beach near her temporary rental. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air, mingling with the cries of seagulls overhead. It was peaceful here, far removed from the chaos of Hollywood and the awkwardness of real estate offices. As she strolled barefoot along the sand, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from Keanu. "Hey, Sandy," the text read. "Just checking in. How's everything going?" Sandra smiled, typing back quickly. "Good morning, Keanu. Just enjoying some quiet time by the ocean. Thanks again for stepping in yesterday. You really saved the day." Keanu responded almost immediately. "Anytime. Honestly, I think Victoria learned more in one afternoon than she has in years. Maybe she'll turn things around." Sandra chuckled softly as she tucked her phone back into her pocket. She hoped Keanu was right. Despite the initial tension, Sandra didn't hold any ill will toward Victoria. Everyone made mistakes. It was part of being human. What mattered most was how someone chose to respond afterward. If Victoria truly intended to change her approach, Sandra believed she deserved a second chance. Meanwhile, back at the real estate office, Victoria arrived early, determined to start fresh. She wore a simple yet professional outfit, a navy blue blazer paired with tailored trousers, and carried herself with newfound confidence. Her desk was organized neatly, files stacked precisely, and her computer screen displayed a motivational quote. "Success is not given. It is earned through respect and hard work." As her colleagues trickled in, Victoria greeted each of them warmly, making an effort to connect on a personal level. Gone was the aloof demeanor she'd once carried. Instead, she radiated sincerity and humility. When Evelyn, her boss, stopped by her desk, Victoria took the opportunity to share her reflections. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened yesterday," Victoria admitted, meeting Evelyn's gaze steadily. "It wasn't just a wake-up call for me. It was a reminder that we're in the business of helping people, not judging them. From now on, I'm committed to treating every client with the same care and attention, regardless of their appearance or background." Evelyn studied her for a moment before nodding approvingly. "That's the attitude we need around here, Victoria. Keep this up, and you'll go far." Encouraged by the support, Victoria dove into her work with renewed energy. She spent the morning reviewing listings, updating property descriptions, and following up with clients whose needs she'd previously overlooked. Each interaction became an opportunity to practice patience, empathy, and professionalism. By lunchtime, she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in months. Later that afternoon, Sandra returned to the real estate office, not because she planned to work with Victoria again, but because another agent had reached out to her directly. This time, she walked in with Keanu by her side, both of them dressed casually but comfortably. The receptionist greeted them warmly, clearly recognizing Sandra and eager to assist. "Welcome back," the young woman said cheerfully. "Agent Harper is waiting for you in conference room B." Sandra thanked her and headed toward the designated area, where a friendly middle-aged woman named Rachel Harper awaited them. Unlike Victoria, Rachel exuded warmth and genuine interest from the moment they met. She shook Sandra's hand firmly, offering a welcoming smile. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Bullock," Rachel said sincerely. "I understand you're looking for something cozy but private?" "That's right," Sandra replied, returning the smile. "Something with character, and maybe a bit of charm." Rachel nodded enthusiastically, pulling out a binder filled with photos and details. "I think I have just the place for you. Let me show you." Over the next hour, Sandra and Keanu reviewed several properties, each more appealing than the last. One stood out in particular, A charming cottage nestled in the hills, surrounded by towering oak trees and lush gardens. The interior was bright and airy, with large windows that let in natural light and a fireplace perfect for chilly evenings. "This is beautiful," Sandra said, her eyes lighting up as she flipped through the images. "It feels like home already." Rachel beamed, clearly thrilled that Sandra loved the property. "Would you like to schedule a viewing?" she asked. "Yes, absolutely," Sandra replied without hesitation. Turning to Keanu, she added, "What do you think? Ready to check it out?" Keanu grinned, nodding eagerly. "Let's do it. I'm curious to see if it lives up to the pictures." As they finalized plans with Rachel, Sandra glanced around the office, noticing how different the atmosphere felt compared to her first visit. The agents seemed friendlier, more approachable, and genuinely invested in their client's happiness. Even Victoria, who sat quietly at her desk nearby, appeared transformed. Her posture relaxed, her expressions open and sincere. Though Sandra didn't interact with Victoria during this visit, she noticed the subtle nod of acknowledgement the agent gave her as she passed by. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the progress Victoria had made since their last encounter. By the end of the week, Sandra had secured the hillside cottage through Rachel, signing the paperwork with a sense of satisfaction. The property was everything she'd hoped for, and more. With its serene surroundings and cozy interiors, it promised to be the perfect retreat from her busy life. On the drive home, Sandra reflected on the journey that had led her here. What started as a frustrating misstep had turned into an unexpected adventure, one that taught valuable lessons about humility, kindness, and resilience. Keanu, true to form, summed it up perfectly as they rode together. "You know," he said, thoughtfully, "sometimes the best outcomes come from the messiest situations. Who would have thought a snobby real estate agent could lead us to your dream house?" Sandra laughed, shaking her head. "Life works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? But honestly, I'm glad it turned out this way, and I hope Victoria finds her footing too. Everyone deserves a second chance." Keanu smiled, patting her shoulder affectionately. "You're too kind, Sandy. That's why people love you." As they pulled into Sandra's driveway, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sandra stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath of cool evening air. For the first time in weeks, she felt completely at peace. The world was full of challenges and surprises, but moments like these reminded her why it was worth navigating them all. And somewhere across town, Victoria Langley sat at her desk, drafting a heartfelt email to a new client. Though her road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she faced it with determination and grace, knowing that every step forward brought her closer to becoming the person she aspired to be.